and a little horn of Greek origin, or Soviet Russia's dictatorial Marxist-Lenin-Stalin communism, grew gradually towards the east until it reached Red North Korea.
Why is North Korea a communist country? As you will know, the Korean country is split in half, with one government in the north and another government in the south. Now we call these two governments North Korea and South Korea, one of which is a very strictly and censored communist government in the north, and the other which is a very liberal capitalist society in the south. How did this come to be? It's also interesting that this wasn't the situation forever, and this is a very new situation that's only been going on for about 70 years. Korea was a united country, and for much of its history it was a united entity, with a Korean empire being established in the early 20th century. However, this was to be very short-lived, as in 1910 the Japanese annexed Korea, becoming a part of a rapidly expanding Japanese empire that would grant them much of Asia, and which would bring them into the Second World War after their bombing the Americans at Pearl Harbor. Many Koreans were deeply dissatisfied with the Japanese occupation, and on the 1st of March 1919 a mass protest was held throughout the country, after which there were months and months of reprisals in which thousands of Koreans lost their lives. Following Japan's annexation, a government in exile was set up in neighboring China, called the Provisional Government of Korea. Various resistance movements joined together to create the Korean Liberation Army, which saw combat throughout the Pacific, fighting alongside Chinese, Soviet, American and Commonwealth forces in India, Burma and China. As the tide was turning in the Pacific towards the Allies' favour, the Korean Liberation Army set their sights on liberating the homeland once again. However, they were beaten to it by the atomic bombs, which were dropped on Japan on the 6th and the 9th of August, followed by Japan's capitulation on the 15th. The first Allied troops to enter Korea were the Soviets, who finally entered the war in the Pacific on the 9th of August, first entering the northeastern Chinese region of Manchuria, which had been occupied by the Japanese. Before the war, communism hadn't been too popular in the north or in any part of Korea for that matter, and actually when the Soviets were trying to set up a Soviet communist-style government in the north, they often recruited help from ethnic Koreans who were living in the USSR at the time, called the Koryu Saram. In the limbo period between the Soviet advance and the Japanese surrender, many Soviet-style committees were formed, under the Committee for the Preparation of Korean Independence. On the 28th of August, the People's Republic of Korea was declared in Seoul. As the Soviets swept southwards into Korea, they were welcomed as liberators. However, the Americans were very alarmed by the rate of expansion, and they certainly didn't want another communist state after most of Eastern Europe had already been claimed for the Red Army. The United States Army sent 2 young generals to land in Korea, who agreed with Soviets to split the country in half along the 38th parallel, as it split the country roughly in half, but more importantly left the capital under American control. The northern half of the country would be left under Soviet control until a time when they could agree upon which part would belong to whom, and they would give the country back to the Koreans. The Soviets worked with the committee set up by the Republic of Korea. However, the Americans completely disregarded it and replaced it with their own military government upon arrival in the peninsula. So I need to talk a little bit about Kim Il-sung, because he is very important for the story of communism in Korea and especially North Korea. Now, Kim Il-sung was born to a poor family in Korea in 1912. He was involved in a lot of anti-Japanese movements, and because of this he fled to China in 1931, where he fought with Chinese guerrillas against the Japanese. He was hunted down during the war, but he always managed to evade capture, although at one point he did have to escape with his men over the Amur River into the USSR. He was there retrained as a Red Army major, and his regiment was one of the first to enter Korea, and he entered Korea in September after being away for almost 26 years. Once he was in Korea, he was put in charge of the Provisional People's Committee for North Korea, which was the bedrock of what would become the Communist Party in North Korea. Meanwhile, there were clashes throughout the peninsula between the far left and the far right. The USSR and USA did their best to keep them from fighting each other, although the USSR obviously favoured the more communist parties, and the USSR obviously favoured the more right-wing, anti-communist, pro-capitalist parties, and many atrocities were committed to different groups during this time. In November 1947, the UN had had more than enough, and they declared that elections would have to be held. Now, the US happily complied. However, the Soviets, were they really going to go with a free election? No. In the southern United States-controlled part of Korea, they voted on the 15th of August 1948, and the Republic of Korea was born. Under a month later, on the 5th of September, the undemocratically chosen Democratic People's Republic of Korea was declared, with Kim Il-sung at the helm, and the rest we all know because they're still divided. Why is North Korea a communist country? As you will know, the Korean country
was a kind of military spectacle the world has become used to seeing in North Korea. Perfectly choreographed, with a vast array of military hardware on show, and the usual statement of defiance from the country's dictator, Kim Jong-un. We will continue to strengthen self-defensive war deterrence to deter, control and manage all dangerous attempts and threatening acts, including ever-growing nuclear threats from hostile forces. But it was the sight of this weapon that caused many international North Korea watchers to sit up and take notice. It appears to be a new intercontinental ballistic missile, the largest and potentially most powerful of its kind ever displayed by Pyongyang, and one that could pose a new threat to the US and the international community.
North Korea has unveiled a new submarine-launched ballistic missile at a military parade in Pyongyang's Kim Il-sung Square. It's described by state media as the world's most powerful weapon. The show of military might, has been overseen by leader Kim Jong-un. Lim Yong-suk has more on what this could mean for relations with U.S. President-elect Joe Biden.
Smiling and gesturing, North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un stood at the podium as thousands of troops and civilian spectators filled Kim Il-sung Stadium. At the night parade, the country's most advanced strategic weapons were on display, including the submarine-launched ballistic missiles, which Pyongyang described as the world's most powerful weapon. Pukgukseong 5 is believed to be the upgraded version of the Pukgukseong 4 that was on display at a larger military parade in October last year. Also on display was solid fuel weapons designed to be fired from mobile land launchers, those which could potentially expand North Korea's capabilities to strike targets in South Korea and Japan, including U.S. military bases. There were no signs of the ICBMs, the intercontinental ballistic missiles, that are capable of reaching the United States. Now, South Korea's Defense Ministry made no comments on the parade, except to say that it was studying the weapons displayed. Experts said it was possible the parade was mostly for a domestic audience, although Kim Jong-un could be sending a message to the President-elect Joe Biden, saying that he had the military capability and they could be used if needed to counter so-called U.S. hostility. But not putting the ICBMs on display could also mean that the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un did not want to start on the wrong footing with the new Biden administration coming in.
Well, as the world awaits the first ever summit between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin, this isn't the first ever between the two countries. We thought we'd take a look back at the two countries' decades-old close bilateral ties. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
This year, North Korea and Russia commemorate the 70th anniversary of the establishment of their bilateral relationship. Then-leader Kim Il-sung visited the Soviet Union in 1949 to hold talks with Joseph Stalin. Kim would later visit the Soviet Union again after the end of the Korean War in September 1953. The Soviet Union would emerge as North Korea's main trading partner and sponsor after the Korean War, with 93 North Korean factories built with Soviet assistance, creating the regime's heavy industrial backbone. In 1988, at the height of their ties, about 60% of North Korea's trade was with the Soviet Union. In the 1990s, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the new Russian government under Boris Yeltsin refused to provide support for North Korea. Fast forward to July 2000, and President Putin's visit to Pyongyang led to a joint declaration being signed by Putin and Kim Jong-il, reaffirming their relations. In August 2011, Kim Jong-il would visit to Russia, as the Kremlin said it was providing North Korea with food assistance, including some 50,000 tons of wheat. With the first summit between Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin set for this week, what results can the world expect? Observers say with denuclearization talks appearing to break down between Pyongyang and Washington, North Korea could be seeking assistance from its longtime ally in Russia. Others are more hopeful, saying this summit could inch North Korea closer to denuclearization. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.